The lunch crowd at Riverside Cafe was at its peak. The clinking of silverware against plates mixed with the buzz of conversation as people enjoyed their meals. In the corner booth, Amara Wilson sat with 3 of her co-workers from City General Hospital. They were all still in their light blue scrubs, having rushed over during their brief lunch break. Amara, with her hair pulled back in a neat bun, laughed at something her friend Lisa had said. As the only black woman at the table, Amara stood out slightly, but that had never bothered her. What did bother her was the way certain people looked at her sometimes, as if questioning whether she belonged. Today was supposed to be a simple lunch with friends before heading back to save lives. I'm telling you, that patient in room 307 is the most stubborn person I've ever met, Amara said, taking a sip of her water. He refused to take his medication until I explained every single ingredient. Her colleagues nodded in understanding. Working in the trauma unit meant dealing with all kinds of people, often on their worst days. At least he's asking questions, said Tom, the newest member of their team. Better than the ones who... The bell above the restaurant door jingled as Officer James Miller walked in. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a stern face that rarely smiled. His blue uniform was pressed perfectly, his badge gleaming under the restaurant lights. Officer Miller had been with the police department for 15 years, and in that time, he had developed certain ways of seeing the world, ways that sometimes led him to jump to conclusions based on appearance rather than facts. The restaurant owner, Mr. Chen, greeted the officer with a nervous smile. They spoke in hushed tones, with Mr. Chen occasionally glancing around the restaurant. Officer Miller nodded, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Amara's table. I don't think the chicken salad is worth coming back for, Lisa was saying. Completely unaware of what was about to happen, Officer Miller made his way through the restaurant, weaving between tables with purpose. A few diners looked up curious, but most continued eating. When he reached Amara's table, he stood there silently until all 4 people looked up at him. Is there a problem, officer? Asked Tom. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. I received a complaint about some disruptive behavior, Officer Miller said, his eyes fixed on Amara rather than addressing the whole table. The owner mentioned a group being too loud. Amara looked around, confused. Their table had been laughing, yes, but no more than the birthday celebration 2 tables over, or the business meeting by the window. We're just having lunch, Amara said calmly. I don't think we're being particularly loud. Officer Miller's expression hardened slightly. Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some ID. Lisa put down her fork. Wait, why are you asking her for ID? We're all sitting here together. The officer didn't look at Lisa. I'm handling a complaint, and I need to see some identification. Amara felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the feeling that came whenever she was singled out for no reason other than the color of her skin. It had happened before, at stores where she was followed by security, at her own apartment building where someone questioned whether she actually lived there, and now apparently at lunch with her colleagues. Officer, Amara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I don't understand why you're asking only me for ID when there are 4 people at this table. By now, people at nearby tables had stopped eating and were watching. The restaurant had grown quieter, the background music suddenly more noticeable in the absence of conversation. Ma'am, I'm not going to ask again, Officer Miller said, his hand moving to rest on his belt near his handcuffs. ID, please. Tom, who had worked with Amara for 3 years, spoke up again. This is ridiculous. We're doctors on lunch break from the hospital. You can see we're all wearing scrubs. None of us were being disruptive. Officer Miller's jaw clenched. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to her. Amara took a deep breath. She knew from experience that showing anger would only make things worse. Officer, I'd like to know what specifically I'm being accused of. We were all talking and laughing together. A middle-aged couple at the next table exchanged glances. The woman pulled out her phone and, trying to be discreet, began recording. The complaint was about disruptive behavior, and I've determined that you're the one I need to speak with, Officer Miller said, his voice rising slightly. Now either show me some ID or we can continue this conversation down at the station. Lisa stood up. This is absurd. We're going to be late getting back to the hospital if this continues. We have patients waiting. Officer Miller finally looked at Lisa. Ma'am, sit down or you'll be joining your friend. The tension in the restaurant was thick enough to cut with a knife. Several more people had their phones out now, recording the interaction. Mr. Chen stood by the counter, looking worried and uncertain about what to do. Amara, knowing that this situation could escalate quickly, reached slowly into her pocket. "My hospital ID is right here, officer." She pulled out her City General Hospital identification card, which showed her photo, name, and title, Dr. Amara Wilson. Trauma surgery. Officer Miller barely glanced at it. "I need a government-issued ID, not a work badge. My wallet is in my locker at the hospital," Amara explained. "We just ran across the street for a quick lunch. I only brought my hospital ID and some cash." "Convenient," Officer Miller muttered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Tom stood up now, too. "Look, we can vouch for her. Dr. Wilson is the head of our trauma unit. We're all just trying to eat lunch before going back to save lives." Officer Miller's hand moved from his belt to his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Miller. I may need backup at Riverside Cafe on 5th Street. A crackly voice responded, asking for details. "I have an uncooperative subject refusing to provide identification," he said. Staring directly at Amara. "That's not true," Lisa exclaimed. "She showed you her hospital ID. She explained she doesn't have her wallet with her." The restaurant was completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff had paused to watch what was happening. Amara, still seated, looked up at Officer Miller. "I understand you're doing your job, but I think we both know what's really happening here. I'm not being disruptive. I'm having lunch with my colleagues like everyone else in this restaurant." Something flashed in Officer Miller's eyes. Anger, perhaps, at being called out even indirectly. "Stand up," he ordered. "Why?" Amara asked, her heart pounding harder now. "Because you're under arrest for disturbing the peace and refusing to comply with a police officer." Gasps echoed around the restaurant. Tom stepped forward. "This is insane." "You can't." "Step back," Officer Miller warned, his hand moving to his handcuffs. "Anyone who interferes will be arrested for obstruction." Amara slowly stood up, her lunch forgotten. She looked around the restaurant at all the faces watching, some angry, some confused, some recording everything on their phones. This wasn't the first time she'd faced discrimination, but it was the first time it had happened so publicly, so blatantly. "Turn around," Officer Miller instructed. "My patients are waiting for me," Amara said quietly. "People who need urgent care. Can we please resolve this another way?" Officer Miller didn't respond except to take her arm firmly and turn her around himself. The cold metal of handcuffs closed around one of Amara's wrists, then the other. Lisa was on her phone now. "I'm calling Dr. Harris. This is unbelievable." Tom tried one more time. "Officer, please. She's a surgeon. People depend on her. Whatever complaint you received, surely it doesn't warrant this." Officer Miller ignored him, reading Amara her rights in a loud, clear voice that carried throughout the restaurant. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As he continued, Amara stood tall, her face a mask of dignity despite the humiliation she felt. She caught the eye of the woman recording at the next table, who gave her a small nod of support. "Let's go," Officer Miller said when he finished, guiding Amara toward the door. As they walked through the restaurant, conversations resumed in urgent whispers. Mr. Chen approached them at the door. "Officer, are you sure this is necessary?" "They were not causing problems," he said nervously. "Did you or did you not call about a disruptive table?" Officer Miller asked sharply. Mr. Chen hesitated. "Yes, but not this one. I meant the young men in the back who left already." Officer Miller's step faltered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Well, I've still got someone refusing to provide proper ID. That's a separate issue." Outside, the bright afternoon sun made Amara squint. People walking by slowed to stare at the handcuffed woman in medical scrubs being led to a police car. Her colleagues followed, still protesting, still making calls. As Officer Miller opened the back door of his patrol car, Amara thought about her patients waiting at the hospital, about the surgery scheduled for later that afternoon, about all the ways this arrest would disrupt not just her day, but potentially the lives of those counting on her medical expertise. What she didn't know was that in just 5 minutes, everything would change. Officer Miller's grip on Amara's arm tightened as he led her through the restaurant door and onto the busy sidewalk. The afternoon sun beat down on them, making the metal handcuffs uncomfortably warm against Amara's wrists. People passing by slowed their steps. turning to stare at the woman in medical scrubs being escorted to a police car. "You're making a mistake," Amara said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. She could feel her phone vibrating in her pocket, probably the hospital wondering where she was. "I have surgeries scheduled this afternoon." "Should have thought about that before causing trouble," Officer Miller replied, not bothering to lower his voice. A small crowd had begun to gather. Some had their phones out recording the scene. Amara could hear whispers. "What did she do? Isn't she a doctor? Why is she in handcuffs?" Lisa, Tom, and their other colleague, David, pushed through the restaurant door behind them. "This is completely uncalled for," Lisa shouted, her face flushed with anger. "She showed you her hospital ID." Officer Miller ignored them, continuing to walk Amara toward his patrol car parked in a loading zone. Each step felt heavy, like walking through deep water. Amara had always been careful about how she carried herself in public. Speak softly, smile often, never give anyone a reason to see her as threatening. Yet here she was, handcuffed on a busy street in the middle of the day, her professional dignity stripped away. "Please," she tried again. "I have patients waiting. Real people who need my help." Officer Miller stopped at his car and turned to face her. "Everyone's got someplace important to be. You're not special." But she was. Not because she thought herself better than anyone else, but because right now, at this very moment, there were people at City General Hospital whose lives might depend on her skills as a trauma surgeon. People whose names she knew, whose families she had spoken with, who trusted her to be there when they needed her. Tom caught up to them, slightly out of breath. "Officer, I'm begging you to reconsider. Dr. Wilson is scheduled to perform a complex vascular repair in less than 2 hours. The patient has been prepped. The team is expecting her." A woman walking her dog stopped nearby, her expression concerned. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, looking between the officer and the handcuffed doctor. "Police business, ma'am," Officer Miller said curtly. Please move along, but the woman didn't move. Instead, she took out her phone and joined the others who were recording. The small crowd was growing larger by the minute, with people spilling out from the restaurant and others joining from the street. "What's she being arrested for?" someone called out. "Disturbing the peace," Officer Miller answered loudly, as if wanting everyone to hear, "and failure to provide identification." "That's not true," David shouted. "She gave you her hospital ID." "She explained her wallet was at work." Amara could feel her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't just about her anymore. Every minute she spent here was a minute away from her patients. She thought of Mr. Reynolds, the elderly man scheduled for surgery that afternoon. His family had been so worried when she'd spoken to them that morning. She had promised them she would take good care of him. "Officer Miller," she said, using his name for the first time, "I understand you're doing your job, but please understand that I also have a job to do. People are counting on me. If you need to take me in, can we at least stop at the hospital first so I can make arrangements for my patients?" For a brief moment, something like uncertainty flickered across Officer Miller's face, but it was quickly replaced by the same stern expression he'd worn since entering the restaurant. "You can make a phone call from the station," he said, reaching for the door handle of his patrol car. Lisa, who had been frantically typing on her phone, looked up. "I've contacted hospital administration. They're sending someone over right now with her ID and documentation." "Too late for that," Officer Miller said, opening the back door of his patrol car. "She's already under arrest." A man in a business suit stepped forward from the crowd. "I'm an attorney," he said, holding out a card. "And I'd like to point out that you have an established probable cause for this arrest. The restaurant owner already told you that this woman wasn't part of the complaint you were responding to." Officer Miller's jaw tightened. "Sir, if you interfere with an arrest, you can join her." The lawyer didn't back down. "I'm not interfering. I'm simply stating facts. This looks like a clear case of racial profiling to me, and I'm witnessing it along with about 30 other people, many of whom are recording this encounter." The crowd had indeed grown. There were people watching from every direction now, their expressions ranging from curious to outraged. A delivery driver had parked his bike to watch. 2 construction workers had paused their work across the street. Even Mr. Chen, the restaurant owner, had come outside and was standing nervously by the door. Officer Miller's radio crackled to life. "Miller, what's your status at Riverside Cafe? Do you still need backup?" He grabbed the radio from his shoulder. "Affirmative. I have one in custody, but there's a crowd gathering. Copy that. Units are 3 minutes out. Amara felt a wave of despair wash over her. This situation was spiraling out of control. What had begun as a simple lunch break was now turning into a public spectacle that might end with her spending hours at a police station while her patients waited for care that wouldn't come. Everyone, please, she said, raising her voice to address the crowd. I appreciate your concern, but I don't want anyone else to get in trouble. This is a misunderstanding that we can sort out. Even as she spoke, she knew her words sounded hollow. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was something far more insidious. The kind of thing that happened to people who looked like her every day, whether they were wearing medical scrubs or hoodies. Officer Miller put his hand on Amara's head, guiding her into the backseat of the patrol car. The motion was so familiar, so routine for him, yet so foreign and humiliating for her. She had to duck her head, awkwardly maneuvering her handcuffed hands as she settled onto the hard plastic seat. Watch your head, he said, the words automatic rather than caring. The inside of the police car smelled of artificial pine and something else, something sour and unpleasant. The partition between the front and back seats was scratched in places, marked with words Amara couldn't make out. This small space, she realized, had held countless others before her, some guilty, some innocent, all treated the same. Before Officer Miller could close the door, Tom rushed forward. Please, at least let me give her phone to the hospital administrator who's on the way. Her patients need to know what's happening. Officer Miller hesitated, then gave a curt nod. Fine, but make it quick. Tom leaned into the car. Which pocket is your phone in? He asked Amara. Left side, she answered, trying to shift to make it easier for him to reach despite her restraints. As Tom carefully retrieved her phone, he whispered, We're not letting this go. Dr. Harris is furious. The chief of surgery has been notified. We'll get this sorted out. Amara nodded, grateful for her colleagues' support but still overwhelmed by the situation. Tom backed away, clutching her phone, and Officer Miller closed the door with a heavy thud. Through the window, Amara could see the crowd continuing to grow. Some people were shouting now, their words muffled by the closed door but their anger clear in their expressions. A woman held a sign she had hastily made using the back of a shopping list. Free the doctor. Officer Miller got into the driver's seat and started the engine. Bunch of troublemakers, he muttered, adjusting his rearview mirror. They don't understand what we deal with every day. Amara caught his eye in the mirror. And you don't understand what I deal with every day, Officer Miller. Both in the hospital and out here in the world. He looked away, focusing on pulling out into traffic. The crowd parted reluctantly, some people taking pictures of the license plate as the car began to move. Inside the confined space of the patrol car, with the sounds of the city muffled and the cool air conditioning raising goosebumps on her arms, Amara felt a strange sense of calm settling over her. This wasn't the first injustice she had faced, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But she knew who she was. Dr. Amara Wilson, respected trauma surgeon, daughter of immigrants who had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities, sister to a brother who had faced his own battles with law enforcement. She thought of her parents, who had taught her to hold her head high no matter what. She thought of her brother, who would be livid when he heard about this, but who had also taught her to stay calm in the face of injustice. Most of all, she thought of her patients, Mr. Reynolds with his weak heart, Ms. Patel recovering from a car accident, the young boy in room 204 whose name she couldn't remember right now, but whose favorite color was green. They were only a few blocks from the restaurant when Officer Miller's radio crackled again. He reached for it, expecting to hear from the backup units he had requested. Instead, a different voice came through, urgent, slightly breathless. All available units. We have a multi-vehicle collision at the intersection of Henderson and 7th. Multiple injuries reported, including children. Fire and EMS responding. Need assistance with traffic control and scene management. Officer Miller picked up the radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 416. I'm currently transporting a prisoner to the station. What's my assignment? There was a pause, then. Unit 416, if you're not dealing with a violent offender, please respond to the accident scene. We need all available officers. The situation is critical. Amara leaned forward in her seat. A multi-vehicle collision with children involved. The hospital would be mobilizing the trauma team right now. Her team. The team she was supposed to be leading. Officer Miller hesitated, glancing at Amara in the rearview mirror. Dispatch, confirm. You want me to respond with a prisoner in custody? That's affirmative, Unit 416. Secure your prisoner and respond. This is all hands on deck. Officer Miller sighed, then made a sharp turn, changing direction toward the accident scene. The siren came on, its wailing cutting through the afternoon quiet. Looks like you're getting a detour, he said to Amara, his voice gruff. Amara didn't respond. Her mind was already at the accident scene, mentally preparing for what she might find there. Multiple vehicles meant multiple patients. Children involved meant pediatric trauma protocols. Without knowing more details, she couldn't prepare specifically, but she could run through the general procedures in her head. The patrol car moved swiftly through traffic, other vehicles pulling aside to let them pass. The city blurred outside the windows, office buildings giving way to apartment complexes, then to the more industrial area near Henderson Avenue. As they got closer, Amara could see smoke rising in the distance. Emergency lights flashed red and blue and white, a kaleidoscope of urgency. And then they turned the final corner and the full scene came into view. It was chaos. 3 cars and a delivery truck were tangled together in the middle of the intersection. One car was on its side, another had its front end completely crushed. The truck had jackknifed, its contents spilled across the road. People were everywhere, some being attended to by paramedics, others standing in shocked silence, a few crying out for help. Officer Miller pulled up to the perimeter that was already being established by other first responders. He put the car in park and turned to look at Amara through the partition. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then Officer Miller spoke, his voice different somehow, less certain than before. "Stay put. I need to check in with the officer in charge." He got out, leaving Amara alone in the back seat, still handcuffed, watching the emergency unfold through the windows of the patrol car. She could see paramedics working frantically. She could see a child being lifted onto a stretcher. She could see things that she knew how to fix. If only she weren't locked in this car with her hands bound behind her back. And then, through the chaos, she spotted a familiar face. Dr. Harris, the chief of surgery at City General, had arrived on the scene and was directing medical personnel. He was looking around urgently, probably trying to account for all available medical staff. Amara pressed her face to the window, willing him to look her way, to see her trapped in the back of the police car when she should be out there, saving lives. What happened next would change everything. The siren wailed above Officer Miller's patrol car as they approached the accident scene. Through the windows, Amara could see the chaos unfolding, twisted metal, shattered glass, and people rushing in all directions. From her seat in the back of the police car, she felt completely helpless, her hands still cuffed behind her back while just yards away, people needed the medical help she could provide. Officer Miller parked at the edge of the scene, the car jolting to a stop. He turned around to look at Amara, his expression unreadable. "Stay put," he ordered before stepping out of the vehicle. Amara watched him walk toward a group of officers who were coordinating the emergency response. The crash was worse than she had initially thought. 4 vehicles were involved. A delivery truck that had tipped onto its side, a small sedan crushed almost beyond recognition, a minivan with its windows blown out, and an SUV with its front end completely destroyed. Debris was scattered across the entire intersection. Emergency lights flashed from every direction. Police cars, fire trucks, and ambulances creating a disorienting light show in the afternoon sun. Paramedics rushed between victims, some already on stretchers, others still being assessed where they lay. Firefighters worked to free someone trapped in the sedan, the sound of metal being cut adding to the cacophony of shouts, cries, and sirens. Amara pulled at her handcuffs in frustration. She should be out there. This was exactly the kind of situation she was trained for. As head of the trauma unit, she had handled countless multi-victim scenarios. Her mind automatically began to triage what she could see from her limited vantage point. The elderly man being helped to an ambulance, walking, alert, likely minor injuries. The young woman with a bandage already turning red around her head, possible skull fracture, needs immediate attention. The child crying in a firefighter's arms, conscious, vocal, good signs but needs assessment. Through the window, she spotted Dr. Harris, the chief of surgery at City General, who had arrived on scene and was speaking urgently with the lead paramedic. Amara knew the hospital would be mobilizing its emergency protocols right now. Surgeons would be prepping operating rooms, nurses calling in additional staff, blood banks checking inventory, all the pieces of a complex system coming together to save lives. And she was sitting handcuffed in a police car because she'd been eating lunch while black officer. Miller returned to the vehicle and opened the driver's side door. He didn't get in, just leaned down to speak to her. I'm needed here to help secure the scene. You'll have to wait. Officer, Amara said, her voice level despite her rising frustration. I'm a trauma surgeon. There are people out there who need help I'm trained to provide. Please take off these handcuffs and let me do my job. Officer Miller hesitated, looking back at the crash site where paramedics were now loading victims into ambulances. You're still under arrest. For what? Amara asked, her patience finally wearing thin. For eating lunch? For being in a restaurant? For not carrying my wallet while wearing scrubs that clearly identify me as a doctor? Or is it really just for being black in public? The directness of her question seemed to catch Officer Miller off guard. He opened his mouth to respond but was interrupted by a shout from across the scene. We need more medical personnel over here. A firefighter was waving frantically near the crushed sedan. We've got a child pinned in the back seat. Losing blood fast. Officer Miller's head turned toward the shout, then back to Amara. Conflict played across his face. Officer, Amara said, her voice softer now, appealing to whatever sense of duty had led this man to become a police officer in the first place. That child needs help. I can help, please. A split second of silence hung between them, then Officer Miller reached for his keys. If you try to run, I'm not going anywhere except to that child, Amara promised. With obvious reluctance, Officer Miller opened the back door and helped Amara out of the car. He turned her around and unlocked the handcuffs. The moment her hands were free, Amara rubbed her wrists, trying to restore circulation. Thank you, she said, meeting his eyes briefly before turning toward the crashed sedan. Hey, Officer Miller called after her. I'm coming with you. Amara didn't wait. She ran toward the accident, her mind already shifting fully into doctor mode. She assessed the scene as she approached. The sedan had been hit from the side, the impact crushing the rear passenger door and trapping whoever was inside. Firefighters had managed to create an opening but were hesitant to move the victim. The lead firefighter looked up as Amara approached. Who are you? Dr. Wilson, trauma surgery, City General, she said, not breaking stride. What do we have? The firefighter's relief was visible. Girl maybe 8 years old. Trapped by the door and seat assembly. We can't move the metal without risking more damage. She's losing blood from a leg wound we can't fully access. Amara nodded, already assessing the situation. Let me see. The firefighters made space for her as she knelt by the opening they'd created. Inside, a young girl with braided hair was pinned in place, her face pale and streaked with tears. A piece of metal from the door had pierced her thigh and blood was pooling beneath her. Hi there, Amara said gently, making eye contact with the child. My name is Dr. Wilson. I'm going to help you. Can you tell me your name? Zoe, the girl whispered, her voice shaky. That's a beautiful name, Zoe. I need to check your injury, okay? It might hurt a bit, but I'll be as gentle as I can. Zoe nodded bravely, though her bottom lip trembled. Amara carefully examined the wound without disturbing the metal shard. We need to control this bleeding before we move her, she announced to the firefighters. Do we have a medical kit? A paramedic handed over a trauma kit, which Amara quickly opened. Zoe, you're doing amazing. I need you to stay very still for me, okay? Where's my mom? Zoe asked, fresh tears welling in her eyes. Amara glanced at the firefighter, who shook his head slightly. Either he didn't know or the news wasn't good. Amara decided to focus on what she could control right now. We're going to find her, she assured Zoe. Right now, I need to take care of you so you can see her soon. Working through the narrow opening, Amara managed to place pressure bandages around the wound without removing the metal object, which was currently acting as a plug preventing worse bleeding. We need to stabilize this before transport, she explained to the paramedic beside her. Once we move her, that metal could shift and tear the femoral artery. If that happens, she could bleed out in minutes. The paramedic nodded, understanding the severity. The nearest trauma center is City General, Amara finished for him. I know, I work there. We need to call ahead and have them prepare for emergency vascular surgery. As Amara worked, she became aware of Officer Miller standing a few feet away, watching with an unreadable expression. Their eyes met briefly, but Amara quickly returned her focus to Zoe. Her pulse is getting weaker, the paramedic noted, concern evident in his voice. She's going into shock, Amara confirmed. We need to move faster. More paramedics arrived with a specialized stretcher designed for extraction. Under Amara's direction, they carefully positioned it as close as possible to Zoe. The fire department can cut away more of the car, offered the lead firefighter. But it'll take time we may not have. Amara assessed the situation quickly. If we can just move this one piece of metal about 2 inches to the left, I think we can slide her out without disturbing the embedded fragment. The firefighters conferred briefly, then brought over hydraulic equipment. With painstaking precision, they began to shift the twisted door frame just enough to create the space Amara needed. "Zoe," Amara said, maintaining eye contact with the girl, "you're the bravest patient I've ever had. In a minute, we're going to move you onto a special bed that will take you to the hospital. It might hurt, but I need you to stay as still as possible. Can you do that for me?" Zoe nodded weakly, her eyelids fluttering, a concerning sign that she was losing consciousness. "Stay with me, Zoe," Amara urged. "Tell me about your favorite animal." "Dolphins," Zoe whispered. "Dolphins are amazing," Amara agreed, keeping the girl engaged while monitoring the firefighters' progress. "Did you know they sleep with one eye open?" A small smile flickered across Zoe's pale face. "Really? Really? They're very smart. Just like you." The firefighter gave Amara a thumbs up. They'd created the space needed. Now came the most dangerous part, moving Zoe without dislodging the metal in her leg. "On my count," Amara instructed the team of paramedics and firefighters gathered around. We moved together, keeping her completely level. 1, 2, 3. With careful coordination, they slid Zoe from the wreckage onto the stretcher. The girl whimpered once but remained still as instructed. Amara immediately checked the wound. The metal fragment had stayed in place. "Good job, everyone," she said, relief evident in her voice. "And especially you, Zoe. You did perfectly." The paramedic secured Zoe to the stretcher and prepared for transport. Amara turned to the lead paramedic. "I'm going with her. She needs continuous monitoring, and I can manage that wound if anything shifts during transport." The paramedic nodded, clearly glad to have a trauma surgeon on hand. As they began moving toward the ambulance, Officer Miller stepped into their path. "Dr. Wilson," he said, his tone formal, "you're still technically in custody." The paramedic looked between them, confused. "What's going on?" Amara met Officer Miller's gaze steadily. "Officer, this child needs immediate surgery. I'm one of the few people qualified to perform it. You can either let me go with her now, or you can explain to her family why you prevented her from receiving the care she needed." Something shifted in Officer Miller's expression. Perhaps recognition of the situation's absurdity, or maybe just a human response to a child in danger. Whatever it was, he stepped aside. "Go," he said simply. Amara didn't wait for him to change his mind. She climbed into the ambulance after Zoe's stretcher, and the doors closed behind her. As the ambulance pulled away, sirens blaring, she caught a glimpse of Officer Miller standing alone, watching them leave. Inside the ambulance, Amara focused entirely on Zoe. The girl's blood pressure was dropping, and her skin had taken on a grayish tinge, classic signs of progressive shock. Amara worked with the paramedic to start additional IV fluids and administer oxygen. "Zoe, stay with me," she urged, checking the bandages around the girl's leg. "We're almost to the hospital." "Am I going to die?" Zoe asked, her voice barely audible over the siren. Amara took the girl's small hand in hers. "Not if I have anything to say about it, and I have a lot to say." That earned her another faint smile from Zoe. The radio in the ambulance crackled as the paramedic communicated with the hospital. "Trauma team is standing by," he informed Amara. "Good," she said. "Tell them to prep OR3 for emergency vascular surgery. Have Dr. Chen assist. He's excellent with pediatric cases." The paramedic relayed the instructions, then gave Amara a curious look. "You really are from City General, then?" The officer? "It's a long story," Amara said, not taking her eyes off Zoe's monitors. "One that can wait until this brave young lady is stable." The ambulance swerved around a corner, and Amara had to brace herself against the wall. The movement caused Zoe to whimper as the stretcher shifted slightly. "Almost there," Amara assured her, checking to make sure the metal fragment hadn't moved. "Just a few more minutes." The hospital appeared ahead, its emergency entrance already busy with ambulances from the crash site. As they pulled up, Amara saw her team waiting, nurses, residents, and Dr. Chen himself ready to take over Zoe's care. The moment the ambulance doors opened, Amara was giving orders. 8-year-old female, traumatic impalement of the right thigh, possible femoral artery involvement. She's tachycardic, hypotensive, and showing signs of hypovolemic shock. Let's move! Her team responded instantly, transferring Zoe from the ambulance stretcher to a hospital gurney and wheeling her rapidly toward the trauma bay. Amara stayed at the girl's side, one hand still holding Zoe's. These are my friends, she explained to Zoe as they moved through the emergency department. They're going to help me take care of you. Dr. Chen fell into step beside Amara. We heard what happened at the restaurant, he said quietly. Are you okay? I'm fine, Amara replied, though the handcuff marks on her wrists said otherwise. Focus on Zoe now. We need to get that metal out and repair whatever damage it's caused. They reached the trauma bay, and the team smoothly transferred Zoe to the examination table. Nurses attached monitors while others cut away the girl's clothing to better assess her injuries. Zoe, Amara said, leaning close to the girl's ear. These doctors are going to give you some medicine that will make you sleep for a little while. When you wake up, your leg will be fixed and we'll have found your mom. Okay? Zoe's eyes were wide with fear, but she nodded bravely. Promise? I promise, Amara said firmly, squeezing the girl's hand. I'll be right here in the operating room with you the whole time. As the anesthesiologist prepared to put Zoe under, Amara stepped back to scrub in. Looking down, she realized she was still in her lunch-stained scrubs with no time to change. A nurse, noticing her dilemma, handed her a fresh surgical gown to put over her clothes. Thanks, Amara said gratefully. Dr. Wilson, another nurse called from the doorway. There's a police officer here asking about you. Amara paused in the middle of washing her hands. She had almost forgotten about Officer Miller and her arrest in the urgency of Zoe's condition. Tell him he'll have to wait, she said firmly. I have a surgery to perform. The nurse nodded and disappeared. Amara finished scrubbing, her mind now fully focused on the procedure ahead. The metal fragment would need to be removed carefully to avoid causing further damage, and any torn blood vessels would need immediate repair. It would be delicate work, requiring all of her skill and concentration. As she dried her hands and prepared to enter the operating room, Amara took a deep breath. The events at the restaurant felt like they had happened days ago rather than just an hour earlier. She knew she would have to deal with Officer Miller eventually, but right now, all that mattered was saving Zoe's life. Dr. Chen joined her at the scrub sink. The girl's mother was in the front seat, he said quietly. She's in surgery with Dr. Patel, multiple fractures and internal bleeding, but she should make it. Amara nodded, relieved that she would be able to keep her promise to Zoe. Let's make sure Zoe makes it too. They entered the operating room together, where Zoe was already unconscious, draped and prepared for surgery. The team looked to Amara expectantly, awaiting her direction. All right, everyone, she said, her voice calm and confident despite the chaos of the past hour. Let's save this child's leg and her life. As Amara made the first careful incision, she was completely focused on her patient, unaware that outside the hospital, events were unfolding that would soon force Officer Miller to confront the consequences of his actions. Officer James Miller stood in the bustling emergency room of City General Hospital, feeling increasingly out of place. Medical staff rushed past him, some giving him curious or hostile glances as word spread about what had happened at the restaurant. He shifted uncomfortably, his police radio occasionally crackling with updates from the crash site. He had followed the ambulance to the hospital, intending to keep Dr. Wilson under supervision. But upon arrival, she had disappeared into the controlled chaos of the trauma unit, leaving him standing awkwardly in the waiting area. No one seemed particularly interested in helping him locate his prisoner. Excuse me, he tried again, approaching the nurse's station. I need to speak with Dr. Amara Wilson. The charge nurse looked up, her expression making it clear this wasn't the first time he'd asked. As I told you 20 minutes ago, officer, Dr. Wilson is in surgery. It could be hours before she's available. This is a police matter, Miller insisted, though his voice lacked the authority it had carried at the restaurant. She's technically still under arrest. The nurse raised an eyebrow. For what exactly? Miller hesitated. At the restaurant, it had seemed so straightforward. A complaint about a disruptive patron. a subject refusing to provide proper ID. But here, in the hospital where Dr. Wilson clearly belonged, the situation felt different. "It's complicated," he finally said. The nurse turned back to her computer. "Well, Dr. Wilson is currently saving the life of an 8-year-old girl from the crash. So unless you plan to handcuff her while she's performing vascular surgery, you'll need to wait." Miller stepped back, unsure what to do next. He should return to the crash site. They needed all available officers, but he couldn't just leave a suspect unattended. Even if that suspect was a surgeon currently saving lives. A commotion near the emergency entrance caught his attention. A group of people had just arrived, many still in medical scrubs, looking upset and determined. Miller recognized them as Dr. Wilson's colleagues from the restaurant. "Where is she?" one of them demanded at the reception desk. "We heard Amara was brought here under arrest." The receptionist pointed toward the operating rooms. "Dr. Wilson is in surgery with the child from the crash." The group looked relieved but still angry. One of them spotted Miller and nudged the others. As a unit, they approached him, their expressions ranging from disbelief to outright hostility. "You," said the woman Miller recognized as having been at Dr. Wilson's table. Her name tag identified her as Dr. Lisa Chen. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Miller straightened his posture. "Ma'am, I was responding to a complaint." "Oh, save it," Dr. Chen interrupted. "We all know what happened. Half the restaurant was filming it. It's probably all over social media by now." Miller felt a chill at her words. Body cameras were one thing. They were department-controlled. But civilian videos were another matter entirely. "You arrested the head of our trauma unit," continued another doctor, his voice tight with anger. "During a lunch break." "For what, eating while black?" "That's not what," Miller began but was interrupted again. "Do you know who Amara Wilson is?" Dr. Chen asked, her voice rising. "She's one of the top trauma surgeons in the country. She saved more lives than you could count, including police officers." Miller didn't know how to respond. He hadn't bothered to really look at Dr. Wilson's hospital ID when she'd presented it at the restaurant. He'd been focused on getting a government-issued ID, following procedure. "Last year," Dr. Chen continued, "when Officer Rivera was shot during that convenience store robbery, who do you think operated on him for 6 hours straight to save his life? Who do you think personally called his family afterward to tell them he was going to make it? That was Amara, Officer Rivera." The name hit Miller like a physical blow. Everyone in the department knew that story. How Rivera had been shot twice in the chest, how the doctors had worked a miracle to save him when most officers with similar injuries didn't survive. The department had even held a ceremony honoring the medical team responsible. "I didn't know," Miller said quietly. "Because you didn't bother to find out," said another doctor, an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. "You saw a black woman and made assumptions." Classic profiling, disgusting. Miller wanted to defend himself, to explain that it hadn't been about race, it was about procedure, about responding to a complaint, about a subject who wouldn't provide proper identification. But the words died in his throat as he realized how hollow they would sound. A young resident approached their group, looking nervous to interrupt. "Excuse me, Dr. Chen? They need additional blood products in OR3 for Dr. Wilson's patient. The girl's bleeding heavily." Dr. Chen's focus immediately shifted. "I'm on it. Tell them I'll bring it myself." She turned to Miller one last time. "If that child doesn't make it because Dr. Wilson was delayed getting to the hospital due to your actions, that's on you." She hurried away, leaving Miller standing there with the uncomfortable weight of her words. He hadn't considered that angle, that his arrest of Dr. Wilson might have delayed medical care for crash victims, that people might have suffered or even died because a qualified doctor was handcuffed in the back of his patrol car instead of saving lives. The thought made him feel slightly ill. "Officer Miller?" He turned to find a hospital security guard approaching. "Yes? There's someone here who wants to speak with you." The guard gestured toward the waiting area, where an elderly man in a police department windbreaker sat watching them. Miller recognized him immediately. Captain Lewis. Retired 3 years ago after 40 years on the force. The captain had been Miller's first supervisor when he joined the department. "Captain," Miller said, walking over to greet the older man. "What are you doing here?" Captain Lewis didn't stand or offer to shake hands. His expression was serious, disapproving. "Sit down, Miller." Miller obeyed automatically, the habit of following the captain's orders still strong. "Sir, My granddaughter called me, Captain Lewis interrupted. She was having lunch at Riverside Cafe today. Saw the whole thing. He paused, studying Miller's face. Told me a cop was harassing a black doctor for no reason. Didn't realize it was you until I got here and asked around. Miller felt his face grow hot with shame. Sir, it wasn't like that. There was a complaint about a disruptive table, Captain Lewis finished for him. Except the restaurant owner told you it was the wrong table. And instead of apologizing and moving on, you doubled down, demanded ID from only the black woman at a table of 4, arrested her when she couldn't produce a driver's license while she was wearing hospital scrubs with her ID badge clearly visible. Put like that, it sounded bad. Really bad. I was following procedure, Miller said weakly. Captain Lewis shook his head. No, son. You were following your biases. And not for the first time. Miller looked up sharply. What's that supposed to mean? It means I've been hearing things since I retired. About your stop records. About complaints that never seem to result in discipline. About how certain officers won't partner with you anymore. The captain leaned forward. I recommended you for the force, Miller. I vouched for you. And this is how you're using that badge? Miller had no response. Captain Lewis had always been his biggest supporter on the force, had helped him through tough times, had defended him when others questioned his judgment. To see disappointment in the older man's eyes now cut deeper than any official reprimand could have. That doctor you arrested, Captain Lewis continued, operated on my wife last year. Bowel obstruction, complicated surgery. Dr. Wilson stayed with Jenny afterward, explained everything so simply that even I could understand it. Checked on her every day until she was discharged. He paused. Jenny says she's the best doctor she's ever had. And you put her in handcuffs for eating lunch. Before Miller could respond, his radio crackled to life. Unit 416, what's your status? We need an update on the prisoner transport. Miller unclipped the radio, aware of Captain Lewis watching him. Dispatch, the subject is currently performing emergency surgery on a crash victim. I'm waiting for her to complete the procedure. There was a pause, then, Unit 416, please clarify. The subject you arrested is performing surgery? Miller closed his eyes briefly. Affirmative, dispatch. The subject is Dr. Amara Wilson, trauma surgeon at City General. She's currently operating on a critical pediatric patient from the Henderson and 7th crash. Another pause, longer this time. Then a different voice came over the radio. The watch commander. Unit 416, report to the station immediately after your current assignment is complete. The chief wants to speak with you. Copy that, Miller replied, clipping the radio back to his shoulder. Captain Lewis was still watching him. You're in trouble, son. And you should be. I know, Miller admitted quietly. A commotion near the emergency doors drew their attention. News crews had arrived, cameras and microphones at the ready. A hospital administrator was trying to keep them outside, but they were persistent. Is it true a doctor was arrested while trying to treat patients? We've heard Dr. Amara Wilson was handcuffed by police during her lunch break. Can you confirm? Has the hospital issued a statement about racial profiling by local police? The questions carried across the waiting room. Miller sank lower in his seat, wishing he could disappear. It's going to get worse before it gets better, Captain Lewis said, nodding toward the news crews. Videos from the restaurant are already online. Your name and badge number too, I'd guess. Miller didn't doubt it. In the age of smartphones and social media, incidents like this spread like wildfire. By tomorrow, everyone in the city would know what he'd done. His fellow officers, his neighbors, his family, his daughter. The thought of his 12-year-old daughter seeing those videos, hearing her friends talk about her dad as that racist cop, made his stomach turn. He'd always told her he became a police officer to help people, to make the community safer. How would he explain this? What do I do, Captain? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Captain Lewis studied him for a long moment. That depends. Are you sorry because you got caught or sorry because you did something wrong? The question hung in the air between them. Miller had been so certain he was right at the restaurant, so confident in his authority and judgment. But now, sitting in the hospital where Dr. Wilson worked, where people respected and needed her, where she was currently saving a child's life, now he wasn't certain of anything. I think, he began slowly, I think I made a mistake. Captain Lewis nodded, but his expression remained stern. That's a start. But recognizing a mistake isn't the same as making it right. Before Miller could respond, The double doors to the surgical wing swung open, and a doctor emerged, still wearing a surgical cap. It was the older man who had confronted Miller earlier. "Dr. Harris," someone called out. "How's the girl from the crash?" Dr. Harris looked exhausted but relieved. "She's stable. Dr. Wilson was able to repair the femoral artery and save her leg. It was touch and go for a while. She lost a lot of blood. But Amara's one of the best vascular surgeons I've ever worked with." A spontaneous round of applause broke out among the hospital staff. Miller watched as smiles spread across tired faces, as colleagues patted each other on the back, as the tension in the room eased just a little bit. This was what Dr. Wilson did every day. She saved lives. She brought relief and hope. What had he really accomplished today? He'd responded to a minor complaint about restaurant noise by arresting a skilled surgeon who was then needed at a major accident scene. He'd delayed medical care for crash victims. He'd embarrassed himself, his department, and worst of all, he'd humiliated an innocent woman just trying to have lunch with her colleagues. "Dr. Harris," Miller called out, standing up. "Is Dr. Wilson still in surgery?" The older doctor turned, his expression hardening as he recognized Miller. "She's with the patient in recovery, making sure the girl transitions safely. Why? Are you planning to interrupt that too?" Miller shook his head. "No, sir. I need to speak with her when she's available." "I'm sure you do," Dr. Harris replied coldly, "but Dr. Wilson has been on duty for nearly 14 hours now. After she ensures her patient is stable, she's going home to rest. Whatever you have to say can wait until tomorrow." Miller nodded, accepting the rebuke. "Of course. I understand." Dr. Harris turned away but then paused and looked back at Miller. "You know, we have a saying in medicine, 'First, do no harm.' Maybe the police should adopt something similar." The words stung, but Miller couldn't argue with them. He'd done harm today, to Dr. Wilson, to the hospital, to the crash victims who might have received care sooner, to public trust in law enforcement. All because he couldn't admit he was wrong, couldn't see past his own biases to recognize a dedicated doctor who happened to be black. Captain Lewis stood up with a slight groan, his old knees protesting the movement. "I'm going home, Miller. But we're not done talking about this." "No, sir," Miller agreed. "We're not." As the captain walked away, Miller remained standing, unsure what to do next. His radio had gone silent. The news crews outside were still clamoring for information. Dr. Wilson's colleagues were gathered near the nurses' station, occasionally glancing his way with undisguised contempt, and somewhere in the recovery room, Dr. Amara Wilson was watching over a young girl whose life she had just saved, the same Dr. Wilson he had handcuffed and humiliated hours earlier. The realization of what he had done, of how wrong he had been, settled over Miller like a physical weight. There would be consequences, professional, personal, perhaps even legal. But right now, in this moment, all he could think about was what he would say to Dr. Wilson when he finally had the chance to speak with her. How could he possibly make this right? As if in answer to his unspoken question, the surgical doors opened again. And there she was, Dr. Amara Wilson, still in her surgical gown, looking exhausted but focused as she spoke quietly with a nurse about patient care instructions. Their eyes met across the waiting room. For a moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, Officer Miller began walking toward her, preparing himself for the hardest conversation of his career. Officer Miller stood frozen in the hospital corridor, watching Dr. Wilson approach. She had changed out of her surgical gown into fresh scrubs, but exhaustion was written across her face. Despite this, she walked with the same dignity she had shown even while being handcuffed in the restaurant. Back straight, head high, eyes forward. Several hospital staff members moved protectively closer to her as she passed, casting suspicious glances at Miller. Word had spread quickly through the hospital about what had happened earlier that day. When Dr. Wilson finally reached him, she stopped a few feet away, maintaining a careful distance. Up close, Miller could see the shadows under her eyes and the slight tremble in her hands, signs of a surgeon coming down from the intense focus of a life-or-death procedure. "Officer Miller," she said, her voice neutral but weary. "I'm told you've been waiting for me." Miller swallowed hard. The speech he had rehearsed in his head while waiting suddenly seemed inadequate. "Dr. Wilson, I wanted to— Amara!" A woman's voice interrupted them as Dr. Lisa Chen hurried down the corridor. Don't talk to him without the hospital's lawyer present. They're on their way. Dr. Wilson held up a hand to stop her colleague. It's okay, Lisa, I can handle this. It's not okay, Dr. Chen insisted. He arrested you without cause. He put our patients at risk. Lisa, Dr. Wilson said again, more firmly this time. Please, give us a minute. Dr. Chen hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Fine, but I'll be right over there. She moved to the nurse's station, close enough to watch, but not to hear their conversation. Dr. Wilson turned back to Miller. You were saying, officer? Miller took a deep breath. How's the girl? From the crash? Something softened slightly in Dr. Wilson's expression. Zoe's stable. The surgery was complicated. The metal fragment had nicked her femoral artery, but we were able to repair the damage and save her leg. She'll have a long recovery ahead, but she should make a full recovery. And her mother, also stable. Dr. Patel handled her surgery. She had internal bleeding and several fractures, but she'll pull through. Miller nodded, genuinely relieved. That's good to hear. An awkward silence fell between them. Around them, the hospital continued its constant rhythm. Phones ringing, pagers beeping, staff moving purposefully from one urgent task to the next. A world where minutes could mean the difference between life and death. A world where Dr. Wilson clearly belonged and where Miller was obviously an intruder. Dr. Wilson, he began again, forcing himself to meet her eyes. I came here to say I'm sorry. What happened at the restaurant? I made a mistake. Several mistakes. Dr. Wilson studied him, her expression guarded. Which mistakes would those be specifically? The question wasn't what Miller had expected. He had anticipated anger, perhaps righteous indignation or cold dismissal, but this calm request for specificity threw him off balance. He faltered, then steadied himself. I singled you out at the table when I shouldn't have. I dismissed your hospital ID when it clearly showed who you were. I escalated the situation unnecessarily. I arrested you without proper cause. Dr. Wilson nodded slightly but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. And, Miller added, the hardest part catching in his throat, I think I treated you differently because of your race. There, he had said it. The thing he had been denying to himself throughout this entire ordeal. The ugly truth at the heart of his actions. Dr. Wilson's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Not triumph or vindication, but a weary recognition. She had heard such admissions before. She had likely been waiting for this one. Thank you for acknowledging that, she said simply. Miller blinked, surprised by her measured response. You're not going to yell at me? Tell me I'm a terrible person. Demand I be fired? A tired smile briefly crossed Dr. Wilson's face. Would any of that change what happened? Would it make either of us feel better? Probably not, Miller admitted. Besides, Dr. Wilson continued, I've been a surgeon for 12 years. I've learned that shouting at people rarely improves their performance. Clear feedback does. Miller found himself nodding. And your feedback for me? You already gave it to yourself, she said. You made assumptions based on my appearance. You escalated rather than de-escalated. You abused your authority. And because of that, a restaurant full of people witnessed a black professional woman being handcuffed for having lunch. And a child with a life-threatening injury almost lost her doctor. Each point landed like a physical blow, all the more powerful for the calm way in which they were delivered. There was no exaggeration in her words, no emotional appeal, just a precise surgical dissection of his failures. I understand if you want to file a complaint, Miller said. You have every right to. I'll support whatever statement you make. Dr. Wilson sighed, running a hand over her face. Officer Miller, I've been on duty for nearly 16 hours now. I've performed 2 surgeries, including one to save a child's life. I'm exhausted. The last thing I want to think about right now is paperwork. Of course, Miller said quickly. I didn't mean to. But, she interrupted, I will be speaking with your department. Not just about you, but about the larger issues. This can't happen again. To me or to anyone else. It shouldn't have happened at all, Miller acknowledged. And I'm truly sorry that it did. Dr. Wilson looked at him for a long moment as if assessing whether his apology was genuine. You know, she finally said, the ironic thing is that if you had come into that restaurant and treated everyone with respect, you might have learned something interesting. What's that? Last year, I operated on one of your fellow officers. Officer Rivera. Gunshot wounds to the chest. He nearly died on my table, but we managed to save him. Miller felt a chill run down his spine. I know, your colleagues mentioned it. Rivera is a friend. He talks about the doctor who saved him all the time. Says he owes her everything. And yet you didn't recognize my name when you saw my ID, Dr. Wilson observed. The implication was clear. If Miller had paid attention to the black doctor who had saved his colleague's life, perhaps he wouldn't have been so quick to dismiss another black doctor having lunch with her colleagues. I'm sorry, he said again, knowing how inadequate the words were. Dr. Wilson glanced at her watch. I need to check on Zoe once more before I go home. Was there anything else? Miller shook his head, then remembered. Actually, yes. Technically, you're still under arrest. I need to officially release you from custody. For the first time, a flash of genuine anger crossed Dr. Wilson's face. You're telling me that after everything that's happened, after I left the crash scene to perform emergency surgery, I'm still considered under arrest? Just technically, Miller stammered. It's a formality. I need to clear it in the system. Then clear it, Dr. Wilson said firmly. Miller pulled out his department phone and quickly completed the process to void the arrest, making sure to classify it as officer error in the system. When he finished, he showed Dr. Wilson the screen confirming the action. It's done, he said. As far as the system is concerned, you were never under arrest. But I was, Dr. Wilson countered. And so was my dignity. And my reputation. Those things don't get wiped clean with a few taps on a screen, Officer Miller. Miller nodded, accepting the rebuke. I understand. And I'll do whatever I can to make it right. Starting with what? Dr. Wilson asked, challenging him. The question caught Miller off guard. He had assumed his apology, and the voiding of the arrest would be the end of it, at least for today. But Dr. Wilson was clearly expecting more. I don't know, he admitted. What would you suggest? Dr. Wilson considered for a moment. When I make a mistake in surgery, and all surgeons do eventually, the first thing I have to do is acknowledge it. The second is to understand why it happened. And the third is to change my practice so it doesn't happen again. She paused. You've acknowledged your mistake. Have you thought about why it happened? The question was like a probe seeking out a painful truth. Miller had spent the hours waiting in the hospital grappling with exactly that question. Why had he singled out Dr. Wilson? Why had he ignored the restaurant owner's clarification about which table had been complained about? Why had he escalated rather than de-escalated? I've been on the force for 15 years, he said slowly. I've developed patterns, ways of seeing threats where maybe there aren't any. Assumptions about who's dangerous and who isn't. Based on what? Dr. Wilson pressed. Miller met her gaze. Based on race sometimes. I didn't want to admit that even to myself. But today made it impossible to ignore. Dr. Wilson nodded, accepting his answer. And how will you change your practice? I'm being placed on administrative leave, Miller said. The chief called while you were in surgery. There's going to be an investigation. Disciplinary action. That's what's being done to you, Dr. Wilson pointed out. I'm asking what you're going to do. The distinction was important. Miller realized she was offering him an opportunity, not for excuses or self-pity, but for genuine reflection and growth. I'm going to start by talking to my daughter, he said, surprising himself with the answer. She's 12. Mixed race. Her mother is black. We're divorced, but we co-parent. He paused, the reality of his situation hitting him anew. She's going to see those videos from the restaurant. She's going to hear people call her dad a racist cop. I need to explain to her what I did and why it was wrong. Something shifted in Dr. Wilson's expression. A softening, perhaps recognition of the human complexity behind the uniform. That's a start, she acknowledged. What else? Miller thought about Captain Lewis, about Officer Rivera, about all the officers he had worked with over the years. I need to talk to my colleagues too, especially the ones who've tried to tell me before that I was being too aggressive with certain people. I didn't listen then. I need to listen now. Dr. Wilson's pager beeped, interrupting their conversation. She checked it quickly. I need to go. Zoe's asking for me. Of course, Miller said, stepping aside to let her pass. Thank you for talking with me. I know you didn't have to. Dr. Wilson paused. You're right. I didn't have to. Just like you didn't have to wait here to apologize. The fact that you did suggests you might actually mean what you say about wanting to change. I do, Miller assured her. Then prove it, she said simply. Not to me, to yourself and to your community. Especially to people who look like me, who fear interactions with police because of experiences exactly like what happened today. With that, she turned to leave, but Miller called after her. Dr. Wilson? One more thing. She looked back, eyebrows raised in question. The girl, Zoe, how did you keep her calm during the extraction? She was terrified, in pain, but you connected with her somehow. A genuine smile crossed Dr. Wilson's face for the first time. I saw her, Officer Miller. Not just her injury, not just another patient, but her. Zoe, a brave little girl who loves dolphins and was scared but trying not to show it. She held his gaze meaningfully. When you truly see people as they are, not as what you assume them to be, it changes everything. With those words hanging in the air between them, Dr. Wilson walked away, her white coat swishing gently as she disappeared through the doors leading to the recovery rooms. Miller stood alone in the corridor, the weight of her words settling over him. He had come seeking forgiveness, perhaps absolution, but Dr. Wilson had offered him something more valuable, a challenge to be better, to see more clearly, to change not just his actions but his perspective. His radio crackled to life, reminding him that the world outside the hospital continued. Unit 416, what's your status? Miller unclipped the radio. Unit 416, I'm clear from the hospital. Heading back to the station now. Copy that. The chief is waiting for you. Miller clipped the radio back to his shoulder, knowing what awaited him at the station. Tough questions, possible suspension, perhaps even the end of his career. But as he walked through the hospital doors into the cool evening air, he felt something unexpected. Not fear or resentment, but a sense of clarity. He had made a terrible mistake today. He had let his biases override his judgment. He had harmed someone who spent her life helping others. There would be consequences, as there should be. But there could also be growth, if he was brave enough to embrace it.